Ooh, whoa. Hey everybody, how's it going? It is Joe from Pause and Select, and this is going to be a really short video where I just talk about basic, sort of the theory of editing, I guess, manga panels, I would say. Obviously, the caveat here is that I am not a professional video editor in any capacity, and I am still very much learning video editing. So obviously, there's going to be some hiccups now and there, and many of you who have been video editing for much longer than I are probably going to essentially say, well, there's an easier way to do that. There's a better way to do that. There's another way to do that, and I totally don't doubt it. This is just generally my workflow and why I do the things I do, why I do use the visuals I do, and so on and so forth. Now, a lot of folks have mentioned that my video editing in the My Hero Academia video was notably a little different, and I would actually argue that it's actually not that different. My video editing in My Hero Academia is a little bit different, I would say, if only because I've used the techniques that I've used more often. I used it in a lot of older videos too. There's actually nothing particularly new. It's just that I've just used it more often in this one. And you sort of see a lot more of it. And so when you've condensed that, you've increased the frequency and condensed it into about a 10 to 11 minute video, it starts to stand out a little bit more. But for the most part, it's really straightforward. The ideas are really straightforward. So this is what it looks like when you're editing manga panels in any particular structure. You'll see that it's just a series of interplays. It's just a series of objects interplaying on top of each other. And a lot of people may be asking, well, Joe, why don't you nest a lot of these elements? Why don't you nest them together? Well, it's funny enough because I don't like nesting too many things because then I sort of lose track of it, and I use layers in very specific ways where it becomes sort of a pain in the ass to sort of nest a lot of things at once, and you'll see why. So we've got I'm here. Now, normally, when you take a look at manga or comics, you oftentimes see people take sort of the full script and then they just move it from left to right, up or down, so on and so forth. I am guilty of that as well. When I first started off doing that, I started doing that as well because I thought, well, this is really the sort of most straightforward way to present manga information. But I think as people are starting to want more and more complex presentation of manga panels. There's a lot of experimentation for that, and I think a lot of it is primarily because of how YouTuber Captain Christian sort of pulls off a lot of his material, and so there's definitely a lot of things that the anime and manga community, particularly the manga community on YouTube, can really learn from editing more specifically panels rather than actual full strips themselves. So what I mean by when these sort of things move up and down, I'm talking about, for instance, let's see here. So I used it here. For instance, I used it here when I provided an example of a Silver Age comic. So you can see it.
Rhetoric and before the drug filter, increasingly PSAs of the Bronze Age.
So as you can see, it's very, very slightly moving when we scrub it a little quicker. It's very slightly moving. I try to avoid doing that as much as I can. I usually only do something like that when there's not anything really specific to stand out, but you sort of just want to focus on the whole thing as itself. And then we go up here, got the Silver Age, so on and so forth. There's a lot of little things that you can do, I think. I'm going to touch upon one really simple one, and that is isolating an object outside of the strip itself. So so as you can see here, now I'm going to be upfront here. If you're going to edit manga like this, it's going to take up a lot of time. It's editing manga in this particular format is going to take up much more time than editing anime. Because with anime, you can sort of get away with it a little bit if you are very careful with your shots, your edits, your cuts. If you hold your frames a little bit more, if you hold them a little bit better, if you're constantly aware of if you're constantly aware of when you're going to sort of have to deal with hanging frames, hanging shots, all those sorts of things, you know, editing anime is so much easier. With manga, yes, you don't have to worry about some of the issues that come with editing anime. For instance, you don't have to worry about timing your footage to the narration. You don't have to worry about mid cuts. You don't have to worry about particularly hard cuts because of footage. You don't have to worry about any sort of thing like that. But you also have to worry about a really huge factor, which is your audience has to deal with what is essentially a still picture for X amount of time. And it's really hard to do really good manga editing really quickly. So you won't see, for instance, a lot of people sort of really quickly spam through images because it's not really for someone who makes videos for pretty much nothing. Well, I guess I'm getting somewhat paid now because of Patreon. For someone who makes videos for pretty much nothing, it's not a good it's not a good way to spend your time if you're doing, for instance, if you're going to be cleaning about 50 to 60 panels at a time, and then you only get like 2 minutes of footage. And you think I'm exaggerating, but I am not. These, for instance, if you look here in the graphics folder here, this is every cleaned up picture I ended up having to make in this video here. Every single one here. This is not including any of the titles. So you have to be very careful. You have to be very careful with your time. But let's not get into this particular one here. Let's move on to, so let's pick a new project here, and I'm going to call it manga demonstration. Sequence won't matter because I'm not going to say this anyways, so sequence won't really matter. So now we have the workflow. Obviously, this is in Premiere Pro. I'm going to try and sort of I'm going to try and prevent using specific terminology. It's going to happen, but I'm going to try and prevent using specific terminology and just talk about mainly the theory of it, because a lot of folks use Vegas, and I'm not familiar with Vegas, but I know that a lot of stuff that can be done in Premiere Pro can also be done in Vegas. It's just called something differently, or it's called something differently, or it's got a slightly different workflow. So I don't want to say, well, this is what you do. You do this, this, and this. And then people try and follow the instructions and it doesn't work in Vegas or something because the workflow is slightly different. So they have to do, so instead of doing like ABC, they do like, BC, ACB or something. So let's get a picture in here. Let's get a picture in here. Let's go to the vlogs here, and let's go to, okay, so I've got a picture which I think is really useful here. This one here is a page from Vagabond, great manga, fantastic manga. But let's get that, let's go to My Hero Academia short form. Let's get the canvas texture as well. So I've got the canvas texture here. So we've got the picture, and I have a canvas texture. This is the one I always use. I don't know where you can find this, to be entirely honest, because I found this when I made the channel, and I thought it was pretty much an incredibly easy canvas texture to use. So I don't really know where you can find it anymore, but I assume you can just like pause the video, take a screenshot, and then reverse Google image search and see what Google brings up. But that's the one I use. I recommend folks use whatever backdrop you want if you want to do it this way. So obviously the simplest way to do this is if you want to, let's say you've got your canvas here, so the canvas is here. Now you're going to see that this canvas is actually much larger than the actual video, than the actual 1920 by 1080p itself, which is actually really useful, because if you want to create, one of the things that we can do here with manga is, we've got this, it's slightly smaller, so let's just fit that a little bit here. So now you've got, so for instance, you've got this, and let's say you want it moving, right? Let's say you want it moving. First off, the thing that you're going to want here is the opacity is on multiply. I always use multiply. A multiply essentially gets rid of a lot of the sort of the white or the incredibly light colors in favor of darker shades. So as you can see here, when we're at normal, we have pure white. Pure white is fine, but it creates a very digital feel. If you want to sort of mimic the manga feel, so if you want to sort of mimic the manga, the manga page look, then you just turn on to multiply, and then sort of everything shows up here. When you're moving frames, when you're moving the panels, for instance, I usually just manually use motion. I have some presets over here, but they always get changed in some way, so I don't even know why I use them anyways. So, you know, let's say you've got panels over here, and I usually use a second. I almost always use a second unless there is something I have to change about it. So what we do here, I should probably explain this. So let's say you want to move this up, right? Let's say you want to move this up. Let's move that down a little bit here. So it's off the screen here. If you want to move this up, once you've moved it up, you're going to get a keyframe. If it doesn't show this keyframe over here, just turn on the keyframe. Now, so as I said, I usually use a second, and then I usually turn on this, I usually turn on the keyframe here. I prefer the ease out. Not the ease out. I prefer the ease in simply because it sort of, it slows down a little bit more. So so then I just put it right in the center. So now what happens is really simple. You see this happen a lot in my videos where, well, now it just shows up like that. And, you know, thanks to the ease out, so I keep calling it ease out. Thanks to the ease in, it essentially has a sort of a deceleration feel to it. When it's purely linear, for instance, so as you can see, when it's purely linear, it doesn't feel natural. It really doesn't. It's really unfortunate. It doesn't feel natural. So I usually just use the ease in. Now, if you want a little bit more of an acceleration or a force to it, a lot of people use After Effects. I believe Lewis from Anime Every Day, he uses a lot of After Effects for his movement. So it's got this sort of energy to it. Unfortunately, I don't do that because I'm somewhat of a visual dinosaur. I like my stuff to be sort of like this slow crawling thing. So I usually don't use After Effects for moving this sort of stuff. So when you run it, so you say, okay, well, sure, that's totally fine. But let's say you know you don't like the cutoff here. Let's say this cutoff here, I don't like it. You know, let's say it's not a good cutoff. So this is where you're going to have to get into Photoshop. This is where you're going to have to get into Photoshop. This is where you're going to have to get into. If you don't have Photoshop, you can get GIMP, or you can pretty much get whatever you need. You can pretty much get whatever image editing program you need. It'll be fine for most part. Let's say that let's say you're talking about Vagabond, but you don't want this cutoff. It's just not the cutoff you want. So let's go into Photoshop here. So I've already got it opened up in Photoshop here. Now this is going to be incredibly messy because this is purely for the sake of getting into the theory of it. So please do not get on my case too much for this. So obviously there's really no trick to it. You pretty much just try and clean out as much as you can. Oh, that's a pretty good cutoff, I think. So you pretty much just try and clean off as much as you can. And I usually use the oh shoot. I usually use the pen tool, and the reason why I use the pen tool is simply because it's a little bit smoother for me. It's a little easier for me to control. I'm sort of a jittery person. So I always try and prevent that. But however you want to be able to select it, it's totally fine. So now we've got that separated here. So now we've got these two pieces separated. So, you know, all we've got now is just that. You can just leave this as it is. It won't make that much of a difference. And now we can just trim off little bits here. Now, a lot of people will say, why don't you just use the magic... why don't you just use the magic lasso tool? I don't really like using the magic lasso tool. It's just not something that I'm a huge fan of. So now you can see here, for instance, that this part here is a little cut off. So it's going to be somewhat of a jarring. It's going to look a little jarring if it's there. So I would say if you are comfortable, you know, you can always just add on a little bit more. And then let's see here. Thankfully, it's pure black, so we don't have to do any particularly significant redrawing. But, you know, it's pure black, so it makes our lives a little easier. Why is my brush size so large here? Why is this so large? Okay, yes, so that'll work. Let's add that in. Okay, let's see here. This is... That looks not great, but... There we go. Let's add in... Sorry, I know this is like a... You were expecting a video editing sort of... You know, that's not great. So in this case, I'm just gonna cut off a little bit here. Okay, so there we go. That's still not great, but I'm at the part where I sort of just have to give up and hope for the best. So we have now got this picture here. Oops. Oh no, Phil. So you don't have to fill it out, but I usually fill out the white so I can get a better idea of exactly what's going on here. There's a little bit of stuff here that could probably be duplicated and redrawn over here, but I'm not gonna fuss over that right now. That's really something that shouldn't be fussed over right now. But let's say, you know, now that we've got that removed, let's take a look here and see what can be done. So we can move that over here. We got the manga stream logo here. I'm not really gonna get into cutting that out for now because that's sort of a... I can always do that later. Let's sort of... The focus here is not so much to sort of get a perfect picture, but really just to create a sense of... create an illusion of a working picture, I would say. You know, because at the end of the day... Oops. Because, you know, at the end of the day, really all you can do in this situation is just hope for the best. And I don't know how long a sword really goes in for, but I don't know how long a sword is. So let's just multiply that. Oh, that does not look good. I don't know how long a sword is, so I am just going to cut that off there. Let's just, when we extend that, that does not look good. So, you know, whatever. Let's just move that in a little bit more. You know, whatever. So let's just... You know, that doesn't look good, but whatever. We'll just have to deal with this. We'll just have to deal with this for now. So let's just say that I need to move this out. It's going to transform. No, not perspective. Oh my god. No, that's not what I want. Yeah, yeah, I'm correct in that. That's not what I wanted. I want warp. And because I am not thinking this through, let's just warp this in a little bit here. Because let's just warp this in a little bit here. You know, because it'll have to converge is eventually, right? Right? That's how swords work, right? I don't know. I don't know. That's how swords work, right? Let's move it in a little bit more, and then let's... No, why is it white? Let's move it in a little bit more. 9 is too short. 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. Let's do 40 opacity. Oops. Okay. You know, that's not great, but we can always sort of wait. When did the crop tool happen? When did I get a crop tool? You know, there we go. Whatever. I just don't care. I don't have the time right now to sort of. I don't have the time right now to really sort of deal with it right now. So let's say we've got that, and you know, I just. Okay, so. Let's say we've got that, and then let's just clean this out here. Just clean that out there. So as you can see, like, this is just like literally just constant, just second guessing myself. I'm just constantly second guessing myself over and over again. And this is why these videos take forever to do, because I always think, oh, it's going to be a good idea just to clean this out here or modify this part here, and it never ends up being a good idea, but I always think that for some reason it's always a good idea. Let's connect that together there. And that cut isn't great, but I mean, like, there's really not much I can really do at this sort of situation, so I'll just leave it like that for now. So let's say we've got this picture here. I mean, this can still be cleaned up a little. This can still be cleaned up a little bit. So let's sort of select that. Sort of cut that. Let's get this in here. Thank you, manga stream. I mean, folks will sort of see the difference. So I'm a little bit uneasy about that, but you know, I'm also at the stage where I sort of am running out of factors to sort of care about. So let's just do sort of a rough clean here. There we go. There we go. So sort of we roughened out the edges a little bit here. So this is really as clean as I can probably get this picture right now. Unfortunately, sorry about this, guys, but this is probably as clean as I can get this picture right now until before I lose my mind, you know, before I lose my mind. But let's say this is what we want to start with. So we've got the picture cleaned up a little bit for what we want to start with. Let's say we want to go with this. And oh man, I totally forgot. I need to set the canvas size correctly. Oh boy. So missing a bunch of stuff. So let's move this over to the side here. Let's add on the whites here. This stuff could probably just be stretched, I would say. To be entirely honest, no, it cannot be stretched. People will notice that. So let's just move that there. Let's just click that there. This one here. Okay, let's do a little bit of a rough cut here. There we go. Okay, let's cut into there. Let's cut into there. That one seems a little rough there. Oops. Let's cut into there. Yeah, there we go. People can still see the whites here. But you know what? There we go. That's probably as good of a rough cut as I'll do for a vlog channel or whatever. I don't care. I don't care right now. Okay. You know, obviously this is the sort of thing that I would probably spend a lot more time on if I was actually making a video on Vagabond, but I mean, like, this is just for the purpose of why it takes me so damn long to make some jank videos or whatnot. So we've got the picture cleaned up here. The picture has been cleaned up. Let's get the canvas size properly set up here. Not 1300, but 1080. We got to do 1080. So now, did that shrink it? No, I shouldn't have shrunk it. Pixels. 1080. That should not have shrunk it. I guess it just looks like, I guess it just looks more stretched out than I thought it would be, but, you know, whatever happens, happens, I guess. So now we've got the picture here. I'm just going to save the picture. Now, I usually save this as a PNG file, so I'm just going to call this, I'm just going to call it 001. I'm just going to save it as a PNG file. So now, whoa, wrong window. So, oh, wrong window. So now we've got the PNG file here. And let's go into the vlogs. So we've got the file here. So as you remember from like 20 minutes ago, we've got this. So we've got this, and you know that's cool, that's great. But let's turn that layer off, and then let's put in sequence 1 instead. So now sequence 1 is a little bit different now. Sequence 1 is this. So now we've got let's turn on multiply. So now we've got a slightly different one. I'm just going to copy and paste the attributes so it has roughly the same startup. So, oops. I brought that over. So now we've got that. So now we've got that one there. So, okay, so this is a little bit better, I think, because it doesn't look like it's so blatantly come from a manga. So as you can see here, this one blatantly comes from a manga. And, you know, this is somewhat of a necessary evil if you want to sort of hit people with the full impact of the entirety of the sequence. So I use this a lot as well because I think sometimes the entirety of the sequence is itself very important. But for instance, sometimes you just want to clean stuff up and you just want to focus on one thing. So you can use something like this. If, however, you want something more than that, you know, if you want, let's say, you know, we've got a lot of empty space here. Let's put some stuff into there. So let's get some stuff into that empty space. As you will recall, we've got all of these awesome panels here that we can totally use. So let's turn this on. So let's turn this on here. Let's put the canvas size to 1080p. So now we got the canvas size to 1080p. Let's move that up a little bit. So let's turn this thing on here. Why are these things moving? Let's lock this later in. Okay, so now we got a bunch of panels here. Now, obviously, one of the things we got to watch out for here is are the lines, because they look really bad when you got these lines here. But first of all, let me just sort of clean this out for a second here. Let's just clone this here. Give me 1 second, guys. Sorry about this. Just gotta clone that here. Okay, and clone. And we just gotta run that over there. There we go. Okay, so obviously one of the big problems here is, you got to watch out for the lines here. The lines here are not great. You don't want those lines showing up like that. That's not good manga paneling. So what we can do here is we can now start separating all of these panels onto separate layers and controlling these layers separately. So let's copy that, and then I usually just paste in place. Now the reason why I paste in place, it's Control Shift V. The reason why I paste in place, because now what I can do here is I can just hold Control, click on the new layer, and it'll click on the layer that's on top. But then I move down to the layer beneath it, and I just delete it. And what that does is that it then deletes the exact position of the previous layer because we pasted it in place. So now what happens is when I turn that off, layer is gone. There's a little bit of a garbage here, but let's just clean that up a little bit. So what we can do here is we can essentially just repeat this process for the other layers. So let's go here, let's clean that up there. Same thing, Control C, Control Shift V, Control Select, move out to the bottom layer. Next thing we go, let's select there. Okay, same thing, Control C, Control Shift V. Remember to select, delete off the first layer. So there, and there. C, V, select, move off the bottom layer, there. Ad infinitum, and you kind of just do this over and over again until the whole thing is clean. I'm not going to select this one here because I'm just going to leave that one there. So you kind of just do this until the whole thing has been essentially cleaned up, for better or worse. And as I must, oh, there was a full panel here. Okay, well, I'm just going to delete that because I'm just going to delete that one off because that's a shame, because that was a pretty nice panel, but I don't have the time right now. So we've got a lot of different elements here. So now we can see that we've got the whole thing here and it's properly set up. You can name all these layers however you like. I just name them. I usually just name them based on their positions, but now we've got all these separate panels here. What the hell is this? Oh, it's the old layer. Okay. So now we've got all these separate panels here. So now they're all like separate individual elements, which is fantastic. They're all great individual elements. So now what we do here is we can sort of just turn these off here. Now we can sort of just mix and match wherever we want them. So let's say I want this to go here. Let's say we want it here. And let's say I want to move it down here a little bit more. Turn off the lock. Remove that. Let's say I want to move it here. So one of the things we do here is, one of the things I find is incredibly useful is you just add a stroke. So a stroke essentially will give you a good idea of exactly how much white space is left. So in this case, what we can do here is we can just delete the rest here. We can trim off a little bit here because no one will really know. And we can sort of just cut that part off there. And so now we've essentially got a separated panel. Now usually when I do a stroke, I usually do an inside stroke at about 2 thickness, because that's usually the closest that we'll get to approximating what looks like a manga panel. So now we've got a somewhat cleaner manga panel here to work with. In addition to that, so we've got the first panel here. Let's say we want to do, okay, so these are sort of taller panels, but let's say we want to do these 3 guys, right? Now, obviously, the problem here is that they are not about the size of that one. So let's shrink those all together. Let's hold down Shift. We can hold down Shift, and we can sort of shrink them all down together. and sort of do something like that. So now we got that, and then we can move it down to the bottom. I'm just going to move it down to the bottom here so I have a good idea. This shouldn't be an issue later when we actually get into it, because it's really not going to be a problem, to be entirely honest. So this is purely just for me to be able to map out exactly where everything is going to go. So let's take a look here. Let's close that out. And now we see here that we've got some lines here. They're actually all perfectly fine except for the one on the right. This one here. So let's sort of add in that stroke again. Let's put that stroke in to thickness inside and see where it ends up. Okay, so we got a lot of like extra white space here. So let's trim that off here. Let's trim that off here. And you're probably let's make it a little bit thicker. Okay. And you're probably thinking, well, why is this necessarily important? Well, I think consistency really goes a long way when you're presenting these sorts of things. So when I'm just going to remove the white space here a little bit so we can get a better idea. Well, actually, I'll just show you what it looks like. So when we put the multiply on, this is what it ends up looking like, which is not amazing, but I mean, we can sort of add in white if we want to color that in, but I'm not going to. That seems like I've taken up enough of your guys' time, so I'm just going to remove that one. Let's say we just want that. Let's just stick with that. Let's just stick with that. Let's not get into any more nonsensical coloring behaviors here. And let's not worry about Joe being an idiot with this. Okay, so let's say this is the final thing we want to do here. We got the panels, we got them cleaned up, we got them rearranged a little bit, we got the picture cleaned up, you know, all that sort of stuff. Let's close this out here. So let's close this out here. So it's layers 3, 5, and 7. So this one here I'm going to save as a PNG. I always save it as a PNG simply because lossless goes a long way, especially when you're editing. So I usually just save it as a PNG. But to be honest, if you're working with multiply, then saving it as a JPEG will also work. So now we've got each individual element. So they're all essentially separate pieces. They're all separate panels. Now this is where you can nest your sequences. I'm not going to go into nesting sequences, but this is where you can do it. Let's just clean this up here because this is really messy. So you can nest your sequences around here, and you know, I will do it because, you know, I don't want to deal with multiple layers, but in this case, let's just leave it for now. So we bring this up here. So, you know, so as you can see here, they're all separate layers. Oh no! So as you can see here, they're all separate layers. So as you can see, we've got the first picture here, and then let's turn on multiply. Again, multiply will essentially focus upon the darkest elements. So that allows us to keep it like that. So now we've got that. So as you can see here, it now just moves into like that. Now, obviously, we don't want this just to show up out of nowhere. That's kind of stupid. So what we want to do here is let's just go in. Now, we know that about a second in, it sort of pops up like that. Now, I think I want the main element to show up before the rest of the elements here. You know, because smaller panels will work a little bit better when they come on as addendums or additions to what's already there. So, for instance, let's go in, and so we got the movement here. Okay, and then around here, you can sort of feel where you want the panels to start moving in. So around here. Okay, so about there. So what we do here is I usually move it in a little bit like that. I usually move it in a little bit out like that, primarily because I'm not a big fan of having just sort of all the empty stuff in case if I want to add titles or anything like that. But generally, we remember that about there was the comfortable spot where it's going to move in. So let's just move. Do I want it to come in? No, I want it to come in from the side. So let's just move it along the x-axis there. And remember, I do 1 second. 1 second is the good number for me. And there. Now, you may be asking, well, Joe, why do you always save it as 1920 by 1080p? Why can't you just save it as a separated individual element? Because if you take a look at it, the Premiere Pro will actually see this as a 1920 by 1080p picture. Well, the answer is really simple. It's because the X and Y axes are always going to be 960 by 540. So when you want to allocate, so essentially I position it in Photoshop. Sort of like a really soft storyboarding, and then I just move all the elements in Premiere Pro. Easy, easy. Everything is done. So we've got it in here, and as always, we sort of ease it in. So now we've got it moving up there, comes in there. Okay, cool. Now we've got one of them. Well, let's talk about the other one. So the second one here is going to come in. That is number 4. Okay, let's go with the bottom one here. So the bottom one here, we are going to be moving the bottom one in here from the top. So the top one here, same thing. Let's turn on, not motion. Let's turn on multiply. So now we got the multiply. That's where it's going to come in from. Now, how this comes in is usually determined by the panel. I cannot have this panel come up from the bottom. The reason why is because this part here will clip with this part here, and it looks very unprofessional. So what I'm going to do is I am going to have this part move in from the top. So as you can see here, we're going to have it move in from the top. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to move this here. Same thing. Absolutely same process. Nothing's changed. Everything is pretty much the exact same thing. So we move in, and then we just go in from the top. Now, I usually just leave it up like that. I usually don't put it too much far up the top. So let's just move it in a little bit more. What I want is I want it to stagger it in. So it's going to start moving in around here. So I want it to stagger it in a little bit. So we go in here, go in here. Okay, so now we got that a little bit here. I think it benefits from a little bit more of a delay. Yeah, okay, that'll work. Now this one is really useful because this one's coming in from the top down to where I want it to be. The other one here, the one that's going to be above it, can actually be the same. So what we can do here is we can actually copy this position, and then we can actually just paste the attribute. Ooh, oh shoot, oh shoot, oh shoot, oh shoot. We can just drag this in again. Let's drag this in, and then we can just paste the attribute, and it'll do the exact same thing. But obviously, I don't want them to move both of them down at the exact same time, because then it just looks like they're one object. And if I'm going to go through the effort of cutting them into separate objects, might as well sequence them out, because then it gives a flow. It gives a visual flow to it. So let's go in here and let's just move that out a little bit more, because that's going to come in later than the one at the bottom, because obviously you don't want it to come in first, even though the number is 3. That's my problem. You want it to come in later, because then it sort of creates this feeling of everything coming together. So that comes in later, and so there we go. So when we play it out, there we go. So that's essentially how you can sort of move panels about a little bit here. Now, let's say if you want to, let's say I want to move the whole thing. Let's say I want to move the whole thing. This is where nested sequences really help, because there's 2 ways you can do this. You can either, for instance, you can either cut every single one. Oops. You can either cut every single, wow, I'm really bad at coordinating my cuts. You can cut every single one and then move them all down, but that's sort of a waste of time. Or what you can do here is you can cut every single one, and then you can, oops, and then you can essentially nest the whole damn thing. So you can nest the whole thing. Now, of course, what's going to happen is when you've nested it, it's going to, you have to re-multiply the layers. Oh, okay, I totally forgot that there was one extra layer there that, okay, I totally forgot that this one here wasn't visible. So let's just delete that. So you can nest the whole thing. When you've nested the whole thing, you're going to notice that it absolutely loses the multiply. So you have to reapply the multiply to the nested sequence. And then what you can do now is that now that you've got it as a nested sequence, you just move the sequence. So we go to 4, we go there. Where'd it go? Oh, I put it on the layer without visibility. So we got it to 4. And I don't know, let's say we want to move it over, let's say if I had another panel, I'm just going to use the same panel. Let's say I'm just going to put that sequence in again. You know, I'm just going to put that sequence in again, and I'll just move it with that sequence in. So don't worry about it. I'm just going to do the exact same thing if I want to move it to the next one here. So let's say I want to move it over, right? Let's say, now I usually do from a left to right. I usually do a left to right swipe, primarily if I want to move from one cohesive thought to a second cohesive thought. So everything that's all mapped together. Otherwise, I just move the things individually because it gives a little bit more of a sense of dynamicism. So what we're going to do here is we're going to move from here to the right. So now, again, at 960, it is going to be 2880. And so we've got it so it's moving from there to there. Now the reason why a nested sequence is important, let's get rid of this unlinked part here, that's useless. Now the reason why a nested sequence is important because these pieces, when they're done, they're still going to be on their movement is going to be on a Bezier, but you wanted to have it on a linear. You wanted to have it linear, and the reason why a linear is useful is because when we move a new object inwards, it's going to be on a linear. Otherwise, what you're going to have is you're going to have some of these elements accelerate or decelerate at times that don't match up with the object that's coming in, and therefore they're going to clash with each other, and it's not going to look very good. So what we're going to do here is let's just move in from 3 seconds. Okay, add on another second. Again, as always, ease in. That's the one I do. And for this one here, I do 960. So now what happens here is that since they're both linear, it's going to move more smoothly. So as you'll see here, there is absolutely no there's no cutting into each other. They're just going to start and accelerate at the right time, at the exact right moments. So as we see, goes in, goes in, goes in, goes in, and there we go. And I have my establishing panels in, and then I move to my next point. And that's pretty much the process there. That's pretty much all you got to do. As you can see here, that was 4 minutes, and this video is 47 minutes. So hopefully you guys kind of understand why it takes me so long to edit video, especially when manga is involved, is because I try and make things work to the best of my ability. Obviously, it's not going to work all the time, and sometimes there's going to be times of failure, but I hope this sort of explains a little bit more of why things happen the way they do, but that's how you can actually work with manga panels. Later on, we're going to get into Luminosity, which is what the My Hero Academia one uses a lot of. That one's going to have a little bit of After Effects, but Luminosity is really good if you want to sort of do that sort of textury, sort of Captain, I guess you could say Captain Christian, but like it's that sort of textury transition effect. What I didn't mention, oh yes, one thing I should mention here is that you can always put in, let's put in at 5 seconds here. You can always put in a little. Now, one of the benefits of why I use the canvas like this is because I always have the canvas move a little bit in the background. So as you can see here, so if you're taking a look at the canvas in the background here, it's moving a little bit. So what you can do here is now it's moving. So now it creates this larger dynamicism. If you see the canvas in the background here, I don't know if you can see it very well, but now it's moving in the background. It's moving and everything looks a little bit better, I would say. Not the most amazing thing, but a little bit better. So as you can see here, so now you can see it move. Everything's moving, and everything's moving, and everything is constantly moving. So it creates this sense of dynamicism, and that's how you can sort of do I think that's a way that you can do manga. And, whether you agree or disagree with the workflow I'm doing or with the presentation I'm doing it as, that's something you can always consider. But yeah, that is pretty much it. I hope anybody who's watching this enjoys it. And as always, if you like it, give it a like. If you like this channel, the second channel, give it a subscribe. I just always sort of stuff. Yeah, I'm gonna have to stop talking. I'm really flubbering now. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoy your day and peace.